subsequently. What could this do? Well, this shows the percentage of summers expected to be warmer than the current 95th percentile of summers in a world which is warmed by 2 degrees centigrade, that target. And you see over most of the world, 90% or more of the summers will be warmer than the current 95th percentile. That is, the hottest 5% of current summers will be absolutely the norm under that 2 degrees C warmer world. Declining crop yields. Many people have argued, well, more CO2 in the atmosphere will fertilize crops. That's true for a little while under limited circumstances, but ultimately rising temperatures damage crop yields, as shown in this analysis by the national academies of yields in India, Africa, and Asia of some of the major crops under global climate change going to 2 degrees, 3 degrees, 4 degrees, and so on. Sea level rise to 2100, the expected range going up from about half a meter to nearly 2 meters, depending on circumstances. Falling ocean pH, about a third of the carbon dioxide we add to the atmosphere gets taken up in the surface layer of the ocean, forms carbonic acid. That acid reduces the availability of calcium carbonate to organisms that use it for forming their shells and skeletons, including corals. And you see the projection here, history 1870, history 2003, future 2016. Green means good for corals, red means bad for corals. And you see we will, by the middle of this century, have made most of the world's oceans bad for corals. Now, the question of whether we really must doubt these conclusions because of the leaked emails and the missteps of the IPCC. What the emails mainly show is that climate scientists are human too. They get aggravated. They don't like being attacked. Sometimes they attack back. We need more efforts at openness and transparency throughout the climate science system, and those are being implemented. But all of the investigations, there have been 5 major independent investigations now of those email leaks, and not one has found any evidence of scientific misconduct, cooking the data, or any such thing. Just evidence of natural human reactions in a contentious environment. The missteps of the IPCC do show the need for increased rigor and adhering to what are already very rigorous review procedures in the IPCC, but the fact is that the errors that have been discovered are few in number and unimportant in magnitude. They don't alter in any way our overall conclusions about what is going on in global climate change. But a third absolutely key point, and we haven't done so well at communicating this as a scientific community, is that the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is not the source of scientific understanding of climate. It's just one of the messengers. The sources are the global community of climate scientists and the mountain of peer-reviewed research, tens of thousands of publications, thousands of investigators, hundreds of locations around the world that support the overall conclusions that I've been presenting here and that the IPCC presents in its periodic reviews. Now let me turn to the question of what more we most need to know. We need improved understanding of the sensitivity of the climate to human and natural forces, including the effects of particles and clouds. Sensitivity means essentially how much the global average surface temperature will increase for a doubling of the concentration of atmospheric carbon dioxide or its equivalent. Improvements in our understanding of that sensitivity will improve predictions. And getting there, getting that improved understanding is going to require continuing investments in paleoclimatology, in basic climate physics, in maintaining and improving our constellation of Earth observation satellites, and running better climate models on faster computers. These are all things we need to do, and it's going to be challenging to do them all in the fiscal climate in which we find ourselves, but it is essential that we do them. We also need better regional disaggregation of predicted changes in temperatures, precipitation, storm tracks, and ice sheets. We're getting better at this, but we're still not good enough, and that regional disaggregation is essential, among other things, to provide the inputs that we need to shape adaptation strategy. The requirements for getting there, for getting better regional disaggregation, are very similar to those in the third item in the previous, under the previous heading. We also need better understanding of the ecological effects of regional climate changes, the impacts on oceans, crops, domestic animals, wildlife, pests, pathogens. And that's needed in order to shape adaptation strategies. That's going to require continuing investments in ecological sciences, and it's going to require major improvements in the diversity and the density of our monitoring networks to keep track of the relevant ecological changes. And we need better integrated assessments that combine predictions, mitigation and adaptation options, including their character, their capabilities, their costs, and combines all that with the social dimensions. We need to better integrate the social sciences and the natural sciences and engineering as we assess the overall situation. And that is going to require additional effort both in integrated assessment methods and practice, as well as in the specifics of mitigation and adaptation options. And this, by the way, is the direction in which the U.S. Global Change Research Program, which involves 13 agencies of the federal government, is moving. The President's proposed budget for it is $2.6 billion in 2012. We'll see how much of that we get. It's going to be a struggle, but we really need to do it. We turn then to the policy questions. What should we do? There are only three options under what we do. Mitigation, measures that we take to reduce the pace and magnitude of the changes in global climate that we're causing. Adaptation, measures to reduce the adverse impacts on well-being that result from the changes in climate that do occur. And suffering, the adverse impacts that we fail to avoid by either mitigation or adaptation. Concerning those three, it's important to understand we're already doing some of each. We're doing some mitigation, we're doing some adaptation, and we are most certainly doing some suffering. What's up for grabs in terms of our policy choices is the future mix of those. How much mitigation, how much adaptation, how much suffering. And minimizing the amount of suffering in the mix, which is clearly what we should be trying to do, can only be achieved by doing a lot of mitigation and a lot of adaptation. Mitigation alone is not going to work because climate change is already happening, and no matter what we do in the way of mitigation, we cannot stop it quickly. Adaptation alone is not going to work because adaptation gets more costly, more difficult, and less effective as the magnitude of the changes in climate to which you're trying to adapt get bigger. So we need enough mitigation to avoid unmanageable climate change and enough adaptation to manage the degree of climate change that's unavoidable. This was the subtitle, by the way, Avoiding the Unmanageable and Managing the Unavoidable, of a report that I and several people in this room and others from around the world produced for the UN Secretary General in 2007. A lot of ways to adapt. Some of them are listed here. I won't read them all to you in the interest of time. You can read faster than I can talk, but it's important to note that many of these are what we call win-win strategies. They're things you would want to do even if we weren't worried about climate change, things that would benefit us as a society, even in a static climate where nonetheless extremes happen from time to time. And these measures would be effective against many of those developments. Mitigation possibilities include certainly reducing the emissions of greenhouse gases and soot absorbing particles from the energy sector, reducing deforestation, increasing reforestation and afforestation, modifying agricultural practices to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases from that sector and the buildup of soil and build up soil carbon. Conceivably, we might become desperate enough and adept enough to scrub greenhouse gases from the atmosphere technologically, artificial trees, as it were. And we might get desperate enough to try various approaches to so-called geoengineering to try to create cooling effects to offset greenhouse heating. There are some forms of this that are quite innocuous, like white roofs and white roads in place of black ones. Others much more contentious and potentially problematic, like injecting reflecting particles into the stratosphere. Some key realities about mitigation. First of all, human carbon dioxide emissions are the biggest part of the problem. They're about half of it and growing. About 85% of that is coming from burning fossil fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas, and those in turn are providing more than 80% of the world's energy. So it's a big deal to change. Most of the rest is coming from deforestation and burning in the tropics. Developing countries now exceed industrialized ones in total carbon dioxide emissions, not in per capita emissions, because there are a lot more capitas there, but they have passed us in total emissions. Third key point, the global energy system can't be changed quickly. We have about $20 trillion invested in the current global energy system, and the normal turnover time of those facilities is about 40 years. Power plants, pipelines, refineries, drilling rigs, whole shooting match. $20 trillion supporting the system we've got. If you want it to be different in 2050, you better start changing it now. And deforestation, alas, is also not easy to change. The forces driving deforestation are very deeply embedded in the economics of food, fuel, timber, trade, and development. So that, too, is a tough problem. How much mitigation do we need? I've already mentioned that limiting the global average surface temperature increase to 2 degrees C is now considered by many to be the most prudent target that's still attainable. We're sitting at about 0.8 right now, but we are committed by the momentum in the system to probably something like 1.5, even if we could instantly freeze the concentrations in the atmosphere. And just to have a 50% chance of staying below 2 degrees C, developed country emissions, that is industrialized country emissions, need to peak no later than 2015 and decline rapidly after that. And developing country emissions must peak no later than 2025 and decline rapidly after that. It is possible to do this. This is a supply curve for global greenhouse gas abatement in 2030, where what is below the line are abatement measures that would actually make money under current economic circumstances. The above the line bars, more to the right, are abatement measures that would cost money. The ones that save money are mostly increasing energy efficiency, more efficient cars, buildings, industrial processes. The ones that would cost money are mostly new sources, photovoltaics, advanced fossil fuel technologies that capture CO2, and so on and so forth. This tells us a lot about what we need. The stuff that already makes money we should be doing already, except there are barriers to doing that. Barriers in tax policy, in regulations of various kinds that are perverse in their effect on the choices that people can make. Financing barriers. We need policies to remove those barriers to picking that low-hanging fruit. In the middle range, we need a price on carbon in order to motivate reaching higher into the tree. And on the far right, the very expensive measures, we need research, development, and demonstration to lower that high-hanging fruit into the reach of a reasonable carbon price. Those are the policies we need. Is it affordable? You can do a very rough calculation. If we paid an average of $100 per ton of carbon, which is near the upper end of that range in the previous graph, to avoid half of current world CO2 emissions, arithmetic is very simple. That would cost $500 billion a year, which is under 1% of current global world product, and much of that would be a transfer, not a loss.